Alright, second try at this video. Unfortunately, the camera fell over. Go figure. Kind of annoying. It lost the file. So, response video to the Modern Mystic, essentially, reaction video, whatever. He made a video response to Antikantavad, who made a video basically asking a question: how do you know what reality is? Or is there some way to qualify a claim of reality? He didn't say it that specifically, but obviously you always have to interpret what he says and put it in more specific language. How do we have this? How do we test these theories of truth, reality? And yeah, the test is, I think, one based on some sort of rational, logical putting together the pieces of what makes something credible and what makes something incredible. Knowing that that's sort of the giveaway. If there's some incredible component to a pie you're making, something that's, Eye of Newt or something, yeah, you don't go eating that pie. And there are beliefs that can be part of somebody's explanation of reality that are sort of what I would call non-starters. They're preposterous nonsense, and they ruin whatever their theory is by just being silly. And so the theory is broken by the theorem, the hypothesis that substantiates it, the evidence. And so I've already made a video about evidence and how to do this thing. But alright, back to the Modern Mystic. So the Modern Mystic response was interesting, 3-part video. I don't want to just point out flaws that I saw just for no reason, but I'll point out one just to refute it in a sense. That he has his own interest, his own particular point of view, and the peak oil thing is kind of a thing for him, the energy thing. And so he sort of implied, or basically directly stated, that we'd have slavery if it wasn't for cheap energy. And we'd still have slavery because it would be convenient. And I'd argue that slavery was way on its way out while people were still burning like whale oil and stuff. The industrial age hadn't really started really going yet, and people were already capable of recognizing there's something fundamentally wrong with this arrangement. And I think it had more to do with the fact that the slavery got more personal. It wasn't industrial slavery anymore. It was household slavery in the New World anyway. And so I would still argue for America anyway. In that sense, slavery it was easier for people. It's like now we can accept the exploitation of capitalism in the world because it is over there. It's industrialized. It's in a camp somewhere, and we don't have to see it. And that makes a huge difference when you're living with it, when it's right under your feet all the time. I think it becomes more obvious that there's something wrong with this picture, that the balance of power is not fair, and the unfairness becomes kind of obvious, and I think it works on people's brains. But it is, I think, a knowledge acquisition problem. Things were acceptable in the past purely because of ignorance. People didn't know what microbes were. They didn't know what thunder and lightning were. They didn't know what anything was. So it was quite reasonable to accept some sort of mystical God theory about the creation of the universe and the creation of the world, because people just didn't have any other explanation. The idea of evolution and billions of years and physics and all that concept, all those things just seem too wacky. Little particles of light and all that kind of stuff. It was just not within people's grasp, and so they just didn't have an alternative explanation for their complexity, for their strangeness. They thought inside. They didn't know what a brain was, essentially, in some respects. To go far enough back, I mean, they really didn't understand the concept of brain. So they had all kinds of senses of being possessed, and it does feel sometimes like you're possessed, when you're possessed by passions. So those are rational conclusions in the environment that people lived in, but they weren't logical. As they gained and acquired more knowledge, it became less and less reasonable to contrive some sort of excuse for what appeared wrong, because you understood something about the mechanism. And so, yeah, we cleansed ourselves of demons and hobgoblins and all the really silly parts of the of superstition and religion, and we gained an understanding of the mechanics and cause and effect within the mechanics. We knew that disease was an accident, not a deliberate act of punishment, and all of that kind of thing. And it changes the world. It changes people's perspective. And I would argue that this perspective change is progressive, that we're progressively climbing a staircase of understanding. And as you make these stairs more and more solid, the realms that you're able to explore in terms of what gets looked at gets deeper and finer and finer and finer. The details, you start picking at it. You now have energy to pick at those things because you resolve these big questions. So the work that was done before you, provides the platform for you to do your work, your bit of analysis from a more enlightened, a higher perspective. And I would argue that the perspective does, generally speaking, go in this progressive direction. And generally speaking. And we're sort of at one of those tricky times in history. There's definitely dark ages. There's definitely steps backward, ebbs and tides in the flow of what dominates cultures. And you could almost argue that our culture is rather immature and vacant at the moment. It's undirected, no clear mission statements itself for some sort of notion of selfishness is fun. There's not much else beyond that. But that's sort of that could be one of these arguments that you could have about what's the right perspective on freedom. And I mean, I could argue that logically, and if you were to take it as a very logical and methodical analysis of the circumstance, I think it could be understood that this idea of freedom is very nice, but it's expensive, and it's going to get more and more expensive as technology gets more and more powerful. And the only way you can control the power of technology is through the users of that technology. It's going to be very hard to keep the secrets away from the people, and so you're going to have to somehow have some way to guarantee the behavior of the people. And so if you don't want any protections against human behavior, technology will do you in. And I think that's so I'm just saying there's a logical answer to the question. I think there is a truth about if you have these two roads, which one you go down, this anarchy road or some sort of rational, rules-based, organized, structured, at least minimally controlled fencing of human behavior. And if you don't realize that we do need cages, I think you just make this explicit logical argument that you will be done in by that liberty, inevitably. The guns will just keep getting bigger, and itchy and scratchy kind of scenario, and you will be done in by them. You'll be done in by the power of technology and its advance. But anyway, it's a side subject, and there's enough side subjects here. So the modern mystic did the fuel thing as if that was an argument for some sort of decisive circumstance that creates motivation for people to change reality. If you have the liberty of fuel, then you don't need to enslave people. And so that's always part of the agenda in deciding the credibility of a truth theory. So the previous video I did in response, I think I talked about that. But that's the nature of the question about the depressive angle of realism, that depressives might have an advantage in terms of seeing the truth, is because depression, I think, correlates to a lack of desire. A destruction of desire. It might not lack, but it is tempered. Desire is substantially tempered by fear and apprehension and worry, concern, grief. These things temper desire. And it's in that atmosphere of a tempered desire, a tempered motivation to bend the truth into something you like it to be, that I would argue does provide an enhanced opportunity to see the truth. I just think it's a fact that you have to consider the power. These are complex things in the sense that the words we use aren't as opposite as we think they are. Good and bad aren't opposites. In that, the absence of a good isn't necessarily a harm, and the bad is always related to some harm created against some sentient, and so there isn't this reversal. And the same is true with desire, and let's use fear or revulsion. I don't know what the right correlate would be. I guess fear. That these things aren't opposites. That they have a different character. And again, I would argue that the component built into the mechanism that creates fear is highly rational, in that the things we fear, generally speaking, correlate really quite directly to something potentially negative, something that's going to be a real threat, and that the desire thing is always kind of mushy. We desire these ego gratification kind of things. They're not real values. So fear, you're valuing the negative character of suffering. And desire, we're not really desiring the pleasing of something in the world. We're desiring our own gratification. And it's where fear is also a personal, it's a personalized avoidance or apprehension about something that may happen to you. So it is selfish. It's not as again, I don't know how else to put it, but I think there can be if you took the time to really go through it and analyze our psychology. I'm saying maybe if you took an hour to go through it, maybe you could make it more sensible than I'm going to make it in this video. But that there is a fundamental distinction. Just like there's a distinction between the fact that we value not having people being killed by earthquakes, like the suffering in the world is worth preventing, but this idea of saying, let's create living things on Mars so they can have roller coasters and go, yay, doesn't have anywhere near the same kind of power. The absent joys aren't as powerful as the threatening sufferings. And in terms of our desire, I'm just saying I think there's a similar asymmetry, a similar disproportion, and that desire is incredibly corrupting, and that desire is entirely arbitrary in its composition, that it doesn't correlate to reality. We desire things because the mechanism, our biology, makes the thing desirable. It makes us hungry for it. Cat going by. There's cat politics out there. So the mechanism is creating it, and it almost doesn't matter what we desire. We'll gain our gratification. So it's like, we have all kinds of different tastes in women or relationships and all this kind of stuff, and people can gain gratification dancing very different dances, kind of a thing. And so there's no right or wrong dance. And so that's where there's a huge there's a huge room. Most people can agree that running a kid over on the street while you're on your cell phone or something is a stupid thing to do. It's wrong. It's bad. Don't do that. It's bad, bad, bad. So we can agree on these negative things, and we don't agree on the positives because they're all these subjective, what's your favorite color kind of bullshit. So the goods are all defined by kind of very subjective, personal conditioning that doesn't have anything to do with anything credible in the world. We're not on rescue missions in terms of our desire. And we're just contriving the gift kind of nature of it. We're just creating the game of the need is creating. I guess all I can say is where the fear seems to have this huge logical component. There's nothing logical about the mechanism that attaches us to consumption and reproduction. It's just a biological mechanism. Yes, there's a correlation to the biological necessity and survival of the fittest and the whole Darwinian structure, but I just mean there's no logic built into it that these things are necessary or important by any logical standard. We don't need to be here. We don't need to survive. We don't need to win the contest. There is no victory in victory beyond the fact that our nature has made us competitive and made us hungry for gold medals, hungry for the win. But there's nothing, you can't logically defend the win. You can't logically make it make any sense because it's all built out of a condition that exists in you subjectively, personally conditioned. There's nothing logical about our pursuit, our hunger. It's just a mechanism where our apprehensions and our appreciation for danger is part of the logical sense. That's the secondary intellectual reaction kind of brain. It does some analysis to figure that out, where the desire is visceral, doesn't require any analysis. It just tells you, I wanty, I needy, I gotta havey. It's a straight line from your biology through the whole mechanism of your psychology, where your psychology and intellect must analyze a situation to see threat and danger. It must find it. It must look for it. And through that looking process, it has to apply the function of logic, and that's why there needs to be a correlation to logic. It's because it's going through the logic system, and the logic system will notice if you're afraid of something silly, like, I don't know, the color red, or whatever. And then you'll analyze, why am I afraid of that? There's no threat there, and you'll see that there's no threat there, blah, blah, blah. That kind of logical thing will happen. I'm not saying there aren't neurotics. I mean, there's plenty of people neurotic, and they are driven by compulsive fear that is just as visceral as a desire. So I'm not saying there isn't a fear element that comes from biology. I'm just saying it more clearly has the substance of what we fear are rational visualizations of real possibilities, and what we desire are completely personally constructed fairy tales of hope. Of, oh yes, I'd like to have a threesome with, and I'd like to, and they're just fantasies placed on the world to say maybe I can have that, and they don't have anything to do with any mission that has any credibility. All right, that's the. It's all very simple when you break it down, but I mean it's complicated to get to it. It's probably going to be like physics. I think there is going to be a simple structure underneath it all, and if we could see it now, we could describe it very easily. But before you can see it, you're trying to describe it. Well, it's just, this is just going to be bang into that because this does that and that does this, and I don't have a shape for that, but it has a shape and it makes it happen. And so we're missing a few of these pieces of because we don't have a blueprint of brains and the stuff they make up versus the stuff they rationally discover. But I guess the substance of my argument is the component of our narrative that is large, the thing that makes the most errors in creating a description of reality, the thing that creates the most errors in our model of reality, internal model of reality, is this desire mechanism. That's the thing that corrupts the fuck out of it. It's not the fear component or the repulsion component. It's the attraction component, the need component, the hunger component that compels us to distort what is now become apparent. I mean, now the truth is kind of obvious. It's this evolution thing. We're just machines. We're replicators, and we have these very complex. Instead of having just great white shark, big giant mouth with teeth, yeah, we have very complex tools. So they're not physical tools anymore. They're game playing tools. They're behavior tools. So we can behave in chameleon-like fashions and pretend and trick and play all kinds of games with it's almost like having the power of invisibility, in the sense that, yeah, we can play these games and that's the tool. The tool is our game playing, our psychological game playing, and that's what made us strong, was our tight family bonds, our gang warfare mentality. So all the isms of our nationalism and nepotism and racism, all of those things were the energy for our survival. And that was our tool, was having a psychology capable of creating those collectively motivating sheeple-style passions. Our capacity to become a mob was one of our tools. Cats can't become a mob. Lots of other organisms can't become a mob. But we were mobbable, and that was our weapon. So I mean, you can just do that kind of dissection, and through that process, it's not that complicated to explain why we are what we are and why we're having these silly conversations about a truth that's so simple. We're just a chemical infestation, very complex hunks of chemistry with still the basic function of consumption and reproduction. And we can see that most of our psychology is sort of caught up in playing that game with this little added component of hierarchy and trying to be the winner and having some medals, some awards, and saying I'm satisfactorily functioning, being able to say I'm doing it right, I'm successful, and that's pretty much all we're doing, right? It's just not that complicated. And so reality is going to get more and more obvious like that. And I think it is this progressive thing. There's a point where you're going to hit the plateau of all the important questions are now answered, and the game is over. I would argue we're already there. Certainly people can be there, and yeah, all the questions that mean anything have been answered, and sadly, this is a game contrived by a DNA molecule, and as one would expect, molecules don't contrive very interesting games, and it's really quite silly. Climb the hill, fall off the hill. It's just stupid. So anyway, in very expensive ways, fall off the hill by crushing all kinds of sentience on crush all kinds of, step on all kinds of shit climbing the hill, and then as you fall off the hill, crush a whole bunch more stuff. I mean, it's just waste all over the place. It's a game of heat, not a game of accomplishment. It's all friction, there's no function. I really like that. Yeah, it's all friction, no function. it's all broken pieces. We're not doing anything. It's precious commodities being controlled by crude forces. It's bull in the china shop. Nothing good is going to happen. Because a DNA molecule came up with it. And DNA molecules are really dumb. So anyway, enough said. Until next time.